Welcome back, dear viewers. You're watching Morning Barakah live on Imam Hussein TV 3. Now, Islam prides itself in promoting inclusivity, empathy, and understanding. We have numerous narrations from our holy prophets and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam regarding the way they treated the less abled, especially teachings such as every person deserving respect and dignity regardless of their physical appearance, and that everyone should have the opportunity to participate in society to the best of their abilities. There are those in our community who have taken it upon themselves to live the words of the Ahlul Bayt on inclusion and go one step further to make it their life's mission. One such person I'm honored to have on the show is Early Years Speech and Language Therapy Clinical Service Lead, Sister Azra Hassanali, who joins me online. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Azra.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you, Brother Ali?
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Fantastic, cool. So look, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I guess, look, first things first, society, Azra, is very ignorant in the way that the less abled works. And they're also ignorant of the science behind it. And it's actually shocking to realize how ignorant the community can be. So what that happens because of the ignorance, it leads to mistreatment of the less abled. Can you start by explaining to the viewers the differences between neurodivergent and neurotypical?
Okay, so I feel like the world is playing catch up with us because we're in a really privileged position of having teachings from the Holy Quran and Ahlul Bayt, as you said. And you know that there is a verse in Quran that says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. So Allah has created us in the best form. He created us all perfectly. There are no mistakes. There are no errors. No one is created less than the other. The only thing that is really important for us to remember is the word difference, and the fact that difference is absolutely okay. Allah meant for the world to be this way. It was very purposeful. We were created like this, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, what we have done as human beings is maybe it's that we thrive on it, or we feel our own sense of good self by it if everything and everyone conforms to certain ideas or rules or norms. So this is what neurotypical means. It is a word that describes somebody whose brain functions or their behaviors or their processing is considered standard or typical or meets the kind of norms that society expect to happen of the people around them, right? Now, it's normally the case that people who are neurotypical don't really have any idea. We don't go around saying, I am neurotypical, because the subject never comes up. No one ever questions us. We become very good at fitting in boxes, behaving in ways that the people around us expect us to. And I would argue, particularly in our communities, we're very good at judging each other based on societal norms and expectations. So we all get very good at fitting that idea of neurotypical. Then you have the term neurodivergent. And this is a term for people whose brain processes, learns, or they behaves differently from what is considered typical.
Right.
Now, you know, back in the day, we would talk about symptoms and red flags or difficulties and disorders. These things were considered a problem or abnormal, but we now understand, or scientists do anyway, and this is where I say we're playing catch up. Communities and scientists are catching up with the idea that actually being neurodivergent isn't inherently an issue for the individual. They simply are different. They learn differently. They behave differently. They play differently. They make friends differently. But that's just the way that their brain works. So, and that is okay.
I don't mean to cut you, because I know this is a very, very important topic, but if the scientists have said, you know, they're not less able, they're just functioning in a different way, why has society taken it as a norm to see them as less abled?
Like I said in the beginning, I wonder whether we just thrive off the idea that we should all fit into boxes. It's easier that way. It's easier to organize our schools and our systems and our places of gathering, whether that be a place of education or worship, in particular ways where everybody has to conform. It isn't easy to organize an event or a place of gathering that considers many different needs and different abilities and different ways of learning or behaving. We're making efforts towards that. So,
Yeah.
with the Muslim community that I frequently go to and that I'm the head of the Send committee for, we're trying really hard to make sure that our events are catered towards as many different people as possible. But actually, it's really hard. It would be so much easier just to do one thing one way and everybody else has to conform. So that's the first thing, is that it's ease. Secondly, I would argue there's something a bit discomforting about difference. We all want to be normal. We all want to be typical. We all want to fit the same sort of way of being. And we have built this idea of perfection as being something that looks the same. And therefore, if you look different, I feel a bit threatened. So I'm going to make sure that everybody else joins me in that belief that you are in some way less than me.
Yeah. Absolutely. So look, everything that you've mentioned is, all about inclusivity. So can you describe what does actually inclusivity mean? We hear this term a lot, but what does it mean in your opinion?
I think there are many different levels to inclusivity. We've got to take ourselves right back to, the World Health Organization defines disability as only something that is held back or impairments that are created because of limitations placed on that person by society. So disability in itself is a social construct. There's no actual thing such as disability. There are just differences. So when we talk about inclusivity, we need to take it right back to our own thinking, our thought processes. How do we even view somebody with a disability? When you see somebody who has a prosthetic leg, uses a wheelchair, perhaps a child who is stimming, perhaps you're sitting in a majalis and a child is making lots of noise, vocalizing repeatedly. Perhaps you're in a supermarket and you meet somebody who's not perhaps pushing their trolley in an exact particular line and aware that lots of people need to negotiate. They're just doing things on their own agenda. Before you've even interacted with that person, what thoughts are going through your mind? And the
Absolutely.
reason why this is important is we know, whether we like it or not, our thoughts will manifest into our facial expressions and then into our behaviors.
Yeah.
Even if it's really subtle, there may be, arguably most of the time there is, an unconscious bias towards people who are neurotypical. We prefer to see, we prefer to talk with, we prefer to interact with people who fit the idea of neurotypical. So let's first look back at our thinking, our thought patterns, and remember our teachings that everybody is accepted, everybody has an equal right to be here, an equal right to access our beautiful deen as well, which was created for, remember, a people who submit, not for a people who conform.
Yeah.
So the
Absolutely.
first idea for inclusivity is just our thought processes. Then
Yeah.
you've got to think about physicality. How are we adapting our houses, our institutions, our madrasas, our mosques, our schools, so that everybody can access it physically, everybody can hear. And if those who are deaf can't hear, then perhaps we need sign language interpreters. Our madrasas need to be adapted for children who learn in all kinds of different ways. You don't need to have a diagnosis of autism or anything else to learn in a different way. I know for me, for example, I learn through doing and discussing and being with other people as a team. But if the people who design schools and madrasas decide to sideline those with disabilities or who are different learners, you're removing their opportunity to learn from their peers or socialize with each other.
Okay. So it
Um,
needs a bit of, I was going to say it needs a bit of patience, especially when, because a lot of the time, you want your event to be successful, and you don't want to be pressurized into thinking that, oh, if there's commotion, they see it as negative because it's going to hinder the majlis, spoil the majlis, spoil the event because there's so much commotion. But actually, this commotion is this human being who is expressing themselves in the way that they only know. And they're not very typical in the way they're thinking, right?
And you know, brother, if you ever heard how loud the salawat of that child might be, it would make you feel bad. Because
Yeah.
I know my salawat is not as loud. It does something to your heart. It's so pure. It's so special. It's so non-intentional. And what I mean is that they're not doing it to impress anybody. They're not doing
No.
it so that the people around them can go, wah, wah, look at them. The salawat is so loud, and go home and talk about it. They're just doing it because they genuinely have this huge love for Allah. What a
Absolutely.
massive lesson there is in that for you and I, right?
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. And that's maybe another point about inclusivity. If any of us are in a position of responsibility, or we lead anything at all, it is our God-given responsibility to make sure that in the planning stages, in our
Yeah.
agendas for meetings, that catering to the needs of different learners or people who socialize differently is in there from the start. So I
Right.
very often get calls from committees or organizations that say, hey, Sister Azra, we're organizing this event and it's running in a week. And we just realized that we haven't really catered towards the needs of people with disabilities. What can we do? And of course, I will give my input. What we need is for people who are skilled and who have knowledge, and people who have lived experience, and I'll talk about that in a second, being on the committees, so that inclusivity can be a part of the planning process right from inception.
Right.
Now, when I talk about people with lived experience, I mean we don't have people that have disabilities or learn or socialize differently on committees, but we desperately need to. So, in the wider world, there is a really big move towards interview panels, having members from the BAME community, the Black and minority ethnic communities, or parents of children with disabilities, or adults who have disabilities or differences themselves.
Yeah.
Because I can assume what inclusivity means and what needs to be done to make people feel included, but I don't really know until I ask those children, adults, and families. That is the best way to make somebody feel really valued and really included. We
Absolutely.
have absolutely no right in a majalis to make a parent feel like you shouldn't be there because your child is making too much noise.
Yeah.
Allah never said that a majalis is not accepted unless you all sit there uniformly, quietly, recite when we tell you to, and stop when we tell you to.
Yeah.
There are no such
Absolutely.
guides for us.
So on that note, especially when it comes to speaking to people who are less abled, language is very, very important. On that note, before we actually came on air, I put my hands up and say, you educated me in just one sentence on just changing the way we describe certain situations or even describe certain people can make a huge difference in how we communicate with them. So for example, again, I'll put my hand up, I'll say, I wanted the title to be accepting different disabilities, right? And you said to me, well, no, why can't we change it to accepting different abilities? And I'm like, well, you've actually, you've made a very good point, and you've educated me in just one sentence. So why is the language we use around disabilities important, Sister Azra?
So the whole idea is that we're trying to move away from the medical model of disability, and actually try to empower each other to believe and to really realize that everybody is inherently able. Everyone has the ability to fulfill their individual own potential. Allah created us all in the most perfect way. We were supposed to be this way. So who am I to say that you are less able? Because then the implication is that I am better than you. And there
Yeah.
is this whole idea of other. There is
Yeah.
no other. There's no place for it. We're all one ummah. We're all created to exist codependently alongside each other. Now, that is not to deny difference. I know that there will be people watching this who say that undeniably my child has difficulties, and that is how they choose to be identified with their disability first, in that I am autistic, I have Down syndrome, rather than I am a boy with Down syndrome, I am a girl with autism. And it is up to people how they like to be identified. But the best thing we can do, therefore, is to ask them. So if we're not sure, exactly as you did, you asked me about the title of today's conversation, and then we had a discussion around that. That
Yeah.
is the best thing that you can do, is to check in with the language that you're using. We want to move away from saying someone has an impairment or symptoms. Symptoms of what? They don't have a disease. They don't have some kind of problem that we're trying to cure or to
Yeah.
get over or to
Yeah.
overcome.
Yeah.
The problem lies with us entirely. We need to fix our way of talking about, supporting, and thinking about someone with a difference. How can
So,
we adapt our own way of being with that person?
So let's give some practical examples of, and maybe educate the viewers now. So you've mentioned things like impairment and symptoms. Impairment, usually, typically that comes around vision. So the visually impaired. How would you then turn that one around? Or for example, as you mentioned, symptoms. How would you turn that one around to make it a bit more inclusive? What are the terms? What are the terms you know from the top of your head that we can change around to be more inclusive?
So rather than talking about a child's symptoms, we can just talk about their behaviors, because they are
If
the way they are. So if a child has rather than saying a child has a symptom of autism, so they flap or they stim, and that is a symptom of autism, we just say that it's just a behavior. And rather than saying something like somebody is confined to a wheelchair, we
Okay.
can just say that they use a wheelchair. Rather than saying that someone has a hearing impairment, we say that they are deaf or hard of hearing. And these are terms that members of those communities have told us that they prefer to use. This, again, isn't something we have made up. So rather than saying somebody is visually impaired, we will say that they are blind. So then
Right.
you're taking away the word impairment. You
Absolutely.
do have
Okay.
to remember, though, that at the end of the day, there will always be a number of people who prefer the word visual impairment. What I'm saying is not set in stone. It is not prescribed in any way. It is what we are discovering. A lot of people with these differences prefer to be talked about and referred to in the language around them as well.
Yeah.
So if anyone listening to this has children, they will know health visitors do something called the 2-year check, and look
Okay.
for red flags in children. So, for example, people who don't let children play or socialize, or in the same way that children speak, using actual speech. And if children don't do these things, then you get something written down in their book as having red flags. What we're moving away from is that these are not red flags. These are simply behaviors that adults need to be aware of. And we, in fact, need to use these as different interests to support that child to fulfill their full potential.
Absolutely. So look, in the last, look, I wish we did have more time, but in the last couple of minutes, the biggest interaction that we have as members of this Shia community, the biggest interaction that we have with those who are different, who have differences, who are less abled. I don't want to say less able, sorry, who have different
Not
abilities.
disabled.
Who have different abilities, is the majlis, is the majalis, is the community events that we go to. So how can we engage better with families of children and adults that have disabilities?
Very first thing that we can do, like I said before, is to check our thought processes.
Yeah.
Because many of us will go by our historic experiences at Majalis, and we might wonder, we might be curious in our mind, will that person be there that takes up a huge amount of space with their wheelchair? If I take my child to the particular area where mothers and children sit, will there be that child there that keeps taking my child's toys and food and poking and pinching them? So before we've even left our home, we've started to make negative assumptions about our experiences with other families whose children have different abilities, or adults as well. So first of all, check our thought processes, and hand in hand with that, please let's open our mind to the idea that actually For a family or an adult who has a disability or different ability, the effort or the time that it takes for them to come out of their house and attend a majalis is huge. We
Yeah.
mustn't underestimate it. And I will admit, I came to this sort of realization only very recently through making very good friends with an extremely admired person in our community who makes that effort wherever she can to bring her child to the majalis. But I will also know that sometimes there are families who send their children who are neurotypical to the majalis and keep their child with a disability or different ability at home. Why? Because they know that they will be told their child is naughty, or, and it really, really hurts me to say this, but families will be told, what did you do? What sin did you commit to be in this position? Astaghfirullah. This is exactly what families are experiencing. And I have to use this platform to say this because there are many members of our community who make these extremely hurtful comments. Now, I can see your face has dropped. Imagine if you were a receiver of this comment. Why on earth would you want to come out of your house and attend our centre again if you received a comment like that? So please, can we stop making such hurtful and unfounded comments? We have absolutely no right to let any of these thoughts go through our head, let alone come out of our mouths.
I did, yeah. I don't want to end on a negative note. So, you know, in your personal outlook and the interactions that you've had with those who are behaving differently, who have differences, what's your positive outlook now?
That we need to meet each other halfway, because these families are really inspiring. They're not heroes. That's again making them other, okay? But they're experiencing some of the most toughest times, and they are so absolutely inspiring. So let's meet them halfway by talking to them, welcoming them. Next time you hear that there is a function at your centre, call them up and say, are you attending? Because I am really looking forward to seeing you. I want to sit with you. In fact, I have space in my car. Let's travel together. Get to know them. Ask them, what is life like for you? Speak to their children as well. Don't try to avoid or be scared or fearful about talking to their child or adult with disability. They're human beings like me and you. They have interests and hobbies and challenges as well. So let's just view each other as human beings and make sure that our centers are places where everybody feels welcome.
Inshallah, inshallah. Sister Azra Hassanali, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for your valuable time.
Jazakallah for the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you, thank you. So that was Sister Azra Hassanali. That was such a thought-provoking conversation. I wish that we genuinely had more time to be able to speak to Azra. And just, it's so eye-opening. So insightful to understand how this world works and understand essentially how to interact with those who are differently abled. Look, we're going to make mistakes along the way, 100%. Like I'm trying, but I do make mistakes in the terminology. But the more we talk about it, the more it becomes a norm, and the more we can get used to these terms. And again, I don't want to use these terms as though they're special, but just making it very inclusive, making it very normal, speaking to those who are differently abled. Now, coming up...